Terrence was 40 years old, made $49,000 a year driving a delivery truck, and his life was about to be split open right down the middle. He stood in the cramped hallway of the two-bedroom apartment in Atlanta's West End, the one he shared with his wife, Rochelle, and felt the familiar, low-grade hum of inadequacy that had become the background music of his marriage. The apartment, with its sagging couch they'd bought for $300 on sale and the scuffed laminate floors, always felt temporary, a placeholder for the life Rochelle believed she deserved. Terrence earned his $49,000 salary through 10-hour days, lifting boxes that weighed more than a small child, navigating Atlanta traffic in a van with no air conditioning, and returning home with the scent of cardboard and sweat clinging to his uniform. It was an honest living, a steady living, but in his wife's eyes, it was a constant, glaring failure. Today, that failure was scheduled to be put on public display. It was Saturday, the day of the annual family cookout at her parents' house in Decatur. The air was thick with the promise of Georgia heat and the far more suffocating promise of condescension from Rochelle's two brothers, Marcus and Jamal. They were entrepreneurs, a word they used with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints. Their latest venture was a fledgling logistics company, a two-truck operation funded by a high-interest $150,000 loan they'd somehow secured, and they never missed an opportunity to contrast their supposed trajectory with Terrence's hourly wage. He adjusted the collar of his simple, clean, $25 polo shirt. He could already hear their voices. "Still slinging packages, T?" Marcus would ask, clapping him on the back a little too hard. "Man's gotta eat," Jamal would add, a smirk playing on his lips as he gestured with a bottle of imported beer that probably cost more than Terrence's lunch for a week. Rochelle would stand beside them, a tight, apologetic smile on her face that wasn't an apology to him, but an apology for him, for his job, for his 2015 Honda Accord with 140,000 miles on it, parked next to their leased BMWs, for his simple $89 Timex watch, a stark contrast to the gleaming, multi-$1,000 monstrosities on their wrists. For his very existence as a delivery driver, a man who worked with his hands, in a family that had come to worship the idea of corner offices and stock options. He had no idea just how wrong he was about the casual nature of the mockery that was planned. He thought it would be the usual death by 1,000 cuts. He didn't know they had sharpened a guillotine just for him. What was the worst part of it all? The true, gut-wrenching devastation wasn't the brothers. It wasn't the cookout. It was Rochelle. It was the woman who once looked at his hands, calloused from work, and said they were the strongest hands she'd ever known. It was the woman who now flinched if he touched her $2,400 Burberry coat after a long shift, complaining that the van smell would cling to the fabric. The shift had been gradual, a slow erosion of respect that had accelerated the moment her brothers started flashing their loan money. Now her love felt conditional, her affection a reward for moments when he could successfully pretend to be someone else. Today he was expected to stand in a backyard, eat a plate of food that would feel like ash in his mouth, and absorb the collective disappointment of the family she had chosen over him. That was the devastating situation. Not just being mocked, but being served up for mockery by the one person who had vowed to have his back. And as the clock on the wall ticked past 3 p.m., he knew he had to go. He had to walk into the lion's den wearing a name tag that read Prey. Because what else could he do? This was his life, the one he had built, the one that was now being systematically dismantled by the people who were supposed to be his foundation. He took a deep breath, the air in the hallway tasting stale and final. But have you ever had a moment where you felt the world shift under your feet? A moment where you realize the story you've been telling yourself is a lie? Let us know in the comments, because Terrence's world was about to do more than shift. It was about to fracture. The facade of their domestic life was built on a foundation of such contrasts. On a Tuesday night, Terrence would come home at 7:15 p.m., his muscles aching from a day of hauling furniture for a premium client. He'd walk into the apartment and the smell of nothing. Rochelle would be on the couch scrolling through her phone, the glow illuminating her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. She worked as an account manager at a downtown PR firm, a job that paid her a respectable $85,000 a year and afforded her a wardrobe that made their shared closet bulge. "Hey, babe," he'd say, dropping his keys into the small ceramic bowl they'd bought at a street fair years ago for $10. "Ugh, finally," she'd reply, not looking up from her screen. "I'm starving." "Did you pick up anything?" He hadn't. He assumed, as he often wrongly did, that she might have started dinner. He looked in the fridge. Half a carton of oat milk, a bottle of $40 Chardonnay, and some wilting kale. He sighed. "I can run out and grab something." "Just order a salad from that place I like," she'd say, finally looking at him. Her eyes would scan his work uniform, a simple navy blue affair with his company's logo, and a faint look of distaste would cross her features. "And can you please shower before you sit down? You smell like effort." It was a joke, but it landed like a stone in his gut. He'd spend $58 on 2 salads and a bottle of sparkling water from a ridiculously overpriced Buckhead Cafe, paying for it with his own debit card. They would eat in near silence at their small $250 IKEA dining table. He'd ask about her day, and she'd give one-word answers while texting her brothers. He would see their names, Marcus and Jamal, flash on the screen of her $1,300 iPhone. He would try to talk about a funny thing that happened on his route, a dog that tried to climb into his van, but her attention was a million miles away, lost in the glowing world of her family's ambitions. The meal would end, and he would be the one to clear the table, wash the expensive non-dishwasher safe plates she'd insisted on buying for $35 each, while she resumed her position on the couch. This was their domestic normalcy, a quiet, gnawing, transactional existence where his paycheck covered half the $1,800 rent, and his presence was tolerated as long as he didn't bring too much of his working-class world home with him. Weekends were a different kind of performance. On Saturday mornings, Terrence would be up by 6:30 a.m., the habit of his work week ingrained in him. He'd make coffee in their $150 Keurig machine using the cheap bulk pods he bought, not the $2 A-pod artisanal ones Rochelle preferred. He'd sit at the kitchen table and look over the finances. His $49,000 a year, after taxes, felt like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon. Rochelle's $85,000 salary was a significant boost, but her spending was astronomical. A $1,200 Gucci handbag one month, a $700 pair of Christian Louboutin shoes the next. When he tried to talk to her about saving for a house, she'd laughed. "A house in this city? On your salary?" she had said, not cruelly, but with a dismissive wave of her hand that was somehow worse. "Babe, let's be realistic. Unless you hit the lottery or my brother's company really takes off, this apartment is it for a while." Her brother's company. Bold Move Logistics. It sounded like something a teenager would name a video game clan. They had leased 2 slightly used Freightliner Cascadia trucks for a staggering $2,800 a month each, wrapped them in a flashy vinyl logo that cost another $6,000, and were now desperately trying to land a major contract. They'd applied to be third-party carriers for a massive nationwide delivery network called Apex Connect. It was the whale they were chasing, a contract that could be worth millions. One Sunday, her brothers came over for brunch. They swaggered into the small apartment, filling it with their loud voices and the scent of expensive cologne. Marcus, the older one, clapped Terrence on the shoulder. "T-Man, still lifting boxes for the people?" he boomed. Jamal, slicker and quieter, just gave a slow nod. "Respect the hustle," he said, but the words were coated in a thick layer of condescension. They sat at the table while Rochelle served them mimosas, made with the $40 Chardonnay and expensive orange juice. Terrence had cooked, making his famous shrimp and grits, a recipe his own mother had taught him. The brothers ate it greedily but didn't compliment the food. Instead, they talked business. "So the application with Apex is in," Marcus announced. "We're in the final review stage. They're vetting our financials, our equipment, the whole 9 yards. If we land this, Rochelle, we're talking a projected $2.5 million in revenue the first year alone." Rochelle's eyes were wide with excitement. "Oh my God, you guys, that's amazing." "It's more than amazing," Jamal said, leaning forward. "It's the start of the empire. And once we're in, we can start bringing in our own people. Family first, you know?" He looked pointedly at Rochelle, then his gaze flickered to Terrence for a split second before looking away. The message was clear. The circle was small, and Terrence was not in it. Terrence just kept eating his grits, the familiar, comforting taste now a bitter reminder of a world he came from, a world of genuine connection that felt light years away from this table. He felt a deep, cold certainty that even if they did succeed, no part of that success would ever be shared with him. He was just the guy who drove the Honda, the guy who made the grits, a temporary fixture in a life that was waiting for an upgrade. The cruelty had been escalating for months, like a fever slowly climbing. It was no longer just dismissive comments or careless insults. It had become a coordinated campaign of emotional and financial exclusion, with Rochelle as a willing participant, if not a co-conspirator. The outrage accumulated in Terrence's chest, a silent, heavy weight he carried with him on every delivery route. The first major blow came on a Thursday evening in April. He was on the phone with his Auntie Carol, a warm, wise black woman with silver locks and a laugh that could fill a room. They were discussing her church's plan to buy a small adjacent property, a little 2-story building they wanted to turn into a youth center. "We got most of the down payment together," she was saying, her voice crackling with pride. "But we're about $20,000 short. A few of us in the family are pooling what we can. Your cousin Michael is putting in $5,000. I was thinking if you and Rochelle could spare even a little something." Before Terrence could answer, Rochelle walked in, home from a happy hour with her colleagues. She was holding her phone to her ear, talking loudly to Marcus. She didn't acknowledge Terrence. "No, I told you, Marcus, he doesn't have that kind of cash," she said, her voice sharp. "His money is, spoken for. Bills and stuff." She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You need to be talking to people who have investment capital, not a savings account that barely hits 4 figures. Stick to your lane." Terrence froze, Auntie Carol's voice a distant buzz in his other ear. Rochelle was talking about him. She was discussing his financial situation with her brother, mocking it, using it as a punchline. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Auntie," he said, his own voice sounding hollow, "let me call you back." He hung up the phone. Rochelle finally noticed him. She lowered her phone, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "What? What was that?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What was what?" "I was just on the phone with my brother." "About my money. About my 4-figure savings account." She had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, but it passed quickly, replaced by defensiveness. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Terrence. Marcus was just asking about potential investors for a side project, and I was being honest. We can't afford to be throwing money at every little thing right now. We have to be smart." "We?" he repeated. "My Auntie Carol is trying to build a youth center in our old neighborhood. My cousin is investing. That's not some little thing. That's family. That's community. But I guess that doesn't count as a bold move, doesn't? Does it? It's not the same, and you know it, she snapped. That's charity. Marcus is talking about building generational wealth. You just don't get it. You're too stuck in your delivery driver mindset. You think small. The words hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Delivery driver mindset. It was the ultimate dismissal. A neat little box she'd built to contain him and everything he was. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked into their bedroom, the sound of the door clicking shut feeling like a final verdict. That night, he transferred $1,500 from his personal savings account, the one she'd just mocked, to his aunt's church. It was more than he could really afford, but it was an act of defiance. It was a declaration that his world, his values, were still his own. The second incident was even more blatant. A month later, Rochelle announced that her parents were selling a rental property they owned, a small duplex in a rapidly gentrifying part of town. They were offering it to family members first, at a significantly discounted price of $150,000, well below its market value of $200,000 to $25,000. It was a golden opportunity. "We should do this," Terrence said immediately, his heart starting to beat a little faster. "Babe, this could be it. This could be our way out of renting. We could live in one unit and rent out the other. With my savings and what we have in the joint account, we could make the down payment." Rochelle avoided his eyes. She was fidgeting with a new $450 Kate Spade wallet. "Well, about that," she began, her tone hesitant. "My parents, they really want to keep it with someone who understands property management, someone with a business mindset." "I can learn," he insisted. "I'm a hard worker, you know that. I can fix things, I can handle tenants." "It's not about that, Terrence," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing edge. "It's about scalability, about asset management. Marcus and Jamal are thinking of buying it. They want to fold it into their company's portfolio." He stared at her. "Their company? Their company is 2 trucks and a mountain of debt. They don't know anything about property management." "They're learning," she fired back, her defensiveness flaring again. "They see the big picture. They're not just thinking about living in one half of a duplex. They're thinking about leverage and equity. It's a language you just don't speak." The argument went on for an hour, but it was useless. Her mind was made up. Her brothers were the future. He was the past. 2 weeks later, he found out the truth. He saw an email on her laptop which she'd left open. It was from her father. It said, "Rochelle, I'm happy to sell the duplex to you and the boys. I agree it's best to keep Terrence's finances separate from this. We need people who are fully committed to the business side of the family." They hadn't just preferred her brothers. They had actively conspired to cut him out. And Rochelle had let them. She had stood by and watched as her own family drew a financial circle that deliberately excluded her husband. But the final, most devastating piece of the betrayal came not from a business deal or a financial slight, but from a simple act of domestic cruelty. One evening, Terrence came home, exhausted and soaked from a sudden thunderstorm that had broken over the city. He'd had to make a delivery to a walk-up apartment on the 4th floor, carrying a 70-pound flat-screen TV. He was tired, wet, and just wanted a hot shower and a quiet evening. He opened the door to their apartment and saw his work boots, the sturdy, steel-toed boots that had protected his feet for 3 years, sitting in the trash can. Next to them was his work cooler, the one he packed his lunch in every day. He turned to Rochelle, who was sitting on the couch, painting her nails a shade of blood red. "Why are my boots in the trash?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rage. She didn't look up. They were disgusting. They were tracking mud all over the floor, and they smelled awful. "I bought you a new pair. They're by the door." He looked. On the mat was a pair of flimsy, fashionable-looking boots that wouldn't last a week on his job. They were a $120 pair of fashion hiking boots, not work boots. They were an insult. "You threw away my work boots?" he said, the words catching in his throat. "Rochelle, those were $200 Red Wing boots. They were broken in. They were mine." "And now you have new ones," she said, finally looking at him with cold, impatient eyes. "It's not a big deal. It's just stuff. Can you please not bring the drama? I've had a long day." He looked from her indifferent face to the trash can where his boots lay discarded like garbage. It wasn't just stuff. It was his livelihood. It was his daily grind, the symbol of the hard work she despised so much. And she had thrown it away without a second thought, replacing it with a cheap, useless imitation. In that moment, the accumulated weight of all the slights, the insults, the exclusions became unbearable. He felt something inside him finally, irrevocably, break. He had been living with a stranger, a woman who looked at the very tools of his survival and saw only trash. The outrage was no longer just a weight in his chest, it was a fire. A quiet, cold, and clarifying fire. And he knew with chilling certainty that he could not let this continue. The discovery happened at 3:58 p.m. on the Saturday of the cookout. Terrence was in their bedroom, changing into the clean, pressed polo shirt he had laid out. He was steeling himself for the afternoon, running through the expected insults and preparing his usual placid, non-reactive responses. He was going to be a ghost at the feast, present but untouchable. That was the plan. Rochelle was in the living room, on the phone with her mother, her voice a high, cheerful sing-song that always grated on his nerves. His phone, a modest $300 Samsung, buzzed on the nightstand where it was charging. It was a notification from a messaging app. He glanced at it. A group chat. He didn't recognize the name, Cookout Committee 2.0. His brow furrowed. He wasn't in any group chat with that name. Then he saw the names of the participants listed below: Rochelle, Marcus, Jamal, and Mama D, their mother, Diana. His heart gave a hard, painful lurch. Someone, probably Rochelle, in her haste and excitement, must have accidentally added his contact to the group instead of someone else's. It was a mistake, a critical, world-altering mistake. For a moment, he just stared at the phone. His first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend he hadn't seen it, to delete the notification and continue on his path of quiet endurance. But the fire that had been lit when she'd thrown out his boots was still burning. It urged him to look, to know. His hands were trembling slightly as he picked up the phone and unlocked it. He opened the app. The chat history loaded, a long scroll of messages from the past week. His eyes scanned the words, and the air left his lungs in a silent rush. It wasn't just a plan to mock him. It was a script, a performance. They had choreographed his humiliation. Jamal, yesterday, 9:14 p.m. "Okay, so is everything set for T-Rex big day?" Lowell Marcus, yesterday, 9:15 p.m. "You know it. Mama's got the ribs, I've got the good liquor, and Rochelle's got the guest of honor on a leash." Rochelle, yesterday, 9:17 p.m. "Not funny, Marcus, but yes, he'll be there. He's already dreading it, I can tell." Thinks it's just the usual jabs. Her message was accompanied by a string of laughing, crying emojis. Terrence felt a wave of nausea. T-Rex. They had a nickname for him. He kept reading, his blood turning to ice. Jamal, yesterday, 9:20 p.m. "The best part is going to be the toast. After everyone's eaten and feeling good, I'm going to get up and propose a toast. To hard-working men." Marcus, yesterday, 9:21 p.m. "Oh, that's dirty. I love it." Jamal, yesterday, 9:22 p.m. "I'll talk about our new venture, about building something. about taking risks. And then I'll raise my glass to Terrence. And I'll say, and to Terrence, for showing us that it's also important to have guys who can deliver the things that people like us build. Mama D, yesterday 9:25 p.m. Now, boys, don't be too mean. Just a little fun. Rochelle, yesterday, 9:28 p.m. It's fine, Mama. He needs to hear it. He's been in a mood for weeks, ever since I told him he couldn't invest in that duplex. He needs a reality check. He needs to understand his place. He thinks his little job is the same as what the boys are doing. His place. The words seemed to lift off the screen and brand themselves onto his brain. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was a calculated effort to put him down, to break his spirit, orchestrated by his wife and her family. They saw him as an obstacle, a lower-class embarrassment to be managed and reminded of his station. He scrolled up, his thumb moving mechanically. There were more messages. Logistics for the party, jokes about his car, his clothes, his perceived lack of ambition. And then he saw the message that made everything click into a horrifying new focus. Marcus, 3 days ago. Update. Application with Apex. Connect is still pending. They said we'll have a final decision within a week. Man, if we get this, that $2.5 million per year is just the start. Rochelle, 3 days ago. You'll get it. I'm manifesting it for you. It's about time this family had a real success story. We can finally move on from, well, you know. He sat down heavily on the edge of their bed, the cheap mattress sagging under his weight. The room felt small, the walls closing in. He could hear Rochelle's laughter from the living room, a bright, carefree sound that now seemed grotesque. He looked at his hands, the calluses on his palms, the slight ache in his knuckles. These were the hands that had paid for half of everything in this apartment. The hands that had held her when her father had a health scare. The hands that had patiently assembled every piece of IKEA furniture in their home. And to them, these hands were a joke. His work was a punchline. His entire identity was a source of shame for the woman he had promised to love and cherish. It was 3:58 p.m. In 2 minutes, his life as he knew it would have officially ended, even if he was the only one who knew it. The screen of the phone glowed with the evidence of his wife's profound betrayal. The discovery was complete. It was irrefutable. And it wasn't just crushing, it was clarifying. The path forward was no longer about endurance, it was about action. For a long moment, Terrence didn't move. The chat log on his phone was a testament to a breathtaking level of disrespect. His first primal urge was to storm into the living room, to shove the phone in Rochelle's laughing face, to watch her cheerful expression crumble into panic. He wanted to hear her excuses, her denials, the pathetic justification she would surely scramble to invent. He wanted the explosion. He wanted the confrontation. But then, another feeling, colder and far more powerful, washed over him. It was the same quiet, clarifying fire from before, now stoked into a controlled inferno. An explosion was what they expected. A shouting match would fit perfectly into their narrative of him being unsophisticated, emotional, a man who couldn't control himself. They would twist it, make him the villain, the one who ruined a perfectly nice family cookout with his oversensitivity. He would lose. Again. No. Strategic restraint. He had learned that on the job. You don't argue with the angry customer on their doorstep. You smile. You document. You handle it through the proper channels. You don't get into a shouting match with the aggressive driver who cuts you off. You let them go, because your destination is more important than your pride in that moment. He took a deep, deliberate breath. He stood up and walked to his closet. He looked past his work uniforms and his simple clothes until his eyes landed on a garment bag at the very back. He unzipped it. Inside was a suit. Not a flashy $1,000 suit like her brothers would wear, but a perfectly tailored, dark navy Hugo Boss suit he'd bought for $950 3 years ago. He had worn it exactly twice. He had never told Rochelle its true purpose. He laid the suit on the bed. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't text or call Rochelle or her brothers. He scrolled through his contacts to a name she had never seen, a name saved simply as Elias. He pressed the call button. Elias picked up on the second ring. "Terrence, it's Saturday. Don't tell me a truck broke down in Savannah." His voice was calm, sharp, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "No, nothing like that, Elias," Terrence said, his own voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside him. "Everything on the network side is quiet. I have a personal question for you." Elias paused. "All right, I'm listening." Elias Vance was the CEO and majority shareholder of Apex Connect, the $180 million logistics network Rochelle's brothers were so desperate to join. He was also the man Terrence had met 15 years ago when they were both driving for a failing courier service, both young, hungry, and full of ideas. They had bonded over late-night runs and shared dreams. When Elias decided to strike out on his own, to build something revolutionary, Terrence had been his first believer. He had emptied his small savings account, every penny he had, which amounted to $25,000, and given it to Elias, not as a loan, but as a seed, an investment. It was a handshake deal back then, Elias had said years later, but it's ironclad in my book. When Apex Connect was formally incorporated, Elias had made sure of it. Terrence was granted a silent, non-voting 8% equity stake in the company. He received quarterly dividend checks, which he quietly reinvested. He had a standing offer to take a leadership role, an office in the gleaming glass tower in Buckhead, a 6-figure salary. He had always refused. He liked the road. He liked the tangible reality of the work. He didn't want to be a boss. He wanted to be the guy who understood the business from the ground up. His stake, which he had never mentioned to Rochelle, was now worth, on paper, just over $14 million. "Elias," Terrence said into the phone, "do you know an applicant company called Bold Move Logistics?" There was a rustle of papers on the other end. "Hang on. Bold Move. Yeah, I see them here. Two brothers, Marcus and Jamal Bishop. Application for a mid-level freight contract out of the Atlanta hub. Projected value around $2.5 million a year. Why?" "They're my wife's brothers," Terrence said. "Oh," Elias said. The single word was loaded with understanding. Elias knew about Terrence's quiet, difficult home life. "Well, they're on the short list. Their financials are a bit shaky, a lot of debt for a new operation, but their proposal is aggressive. The regional VP is leaning toward approving them, wants to give a new local outfit a shot." Terrence's heart was hammering against his ribs. This was it, the moment of decision. "I have a favor to ask, Elias. A big one." "Name it." "I need you to come to a family cookout, right now. And I need you to bring the regional VP with you, the one handling the Bold Move application." There was a dead silence on the line. Terrence could picture Elias in his minimalist home office overlooking the city, his brow furrowed. "A cookout?" Elias repeated slowly. "Yes, in Decatur. I'll text you the address. I need you to arrive at exactly 5:30 p.m. Not before, not after. I need you to walk onto the back patio and ask for me, by name. And then, in front of everyone, I need the VP to ask for my final approval on the Bold Move Logistics contract." Another long pause. Then, a low chuckle from Elias. "Terrence, my friend, you've been quiet for a long, long time. What's going on?" "They planned a party to humiliate me for being a delivery driver," Terrence said, The words flat and devoid of emotion. My wife is in on it. They think I'm just a guy who lifts boxes. They've been mocking me for years. Today, I'm going to show them what I've been delivering. The chuckle on the other end of the line stopped. It was replaced by a tone of cold, hard loyalty. I see, Elias said. Consider it done. I'll get Richard on the phone right now. What car should we take? Make it impressive, Terrence said. Make it undeniable. 3 black Navigators it is, Elias replied without hesitation. We'll see you at 5:30, Mr. Chairman of the Driver Council. That was Terrence's unofficial, but very real, title within the company. He was the voice of the thousands of drivers on the road. Thank you, Elias. Don't thank me, Elias said, his voice grim. Family business. He hung up. Terrence looked at the Hugo Boss suit on the bed. He folded it carefully and placed it back in the garment bag. He wouldn't be wearing that today. That was for his new life. For today, his simple $25 polo shirt and his clean work pants would do just fine. He was going to walk into that party as the man they thought he was. He was going to let them play out their pathetic little script. He was going to absorb their insults and smile. And he was going to wait for the clock to strike 5:30. The act of playing dumb was the hardest performance of Terrence's life. Every nerve ending screamed with the need to react, to expose the lie. But he forced a placid calm onto his face, a mask of benign ignorance. He walked out of the bedroom, leaving the phone with its toxic messages behind. Rochelle was just getting off the phone, a wide, predatory smile on her face. Ready to go? She asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She had changed into a tight-fitting white sundress that cost $350 and did little to hide her contempt. Ready as I'll ever be, Terrence said with a small, weary smile that she would interpret as his usual resignation. The car ride to her parents' house in Decatur was a masterclass in tension. He drove their 2015 Honda Accord, his hands steady on the wheel. Rochelle sat in the passenger seat, reapplying her $50 Dior lipstick in the visor mirror. The silence was thick, broken only by her occasional sighs. Try to have a good time today, okay? She said, not looking at him. It wasn't a request, it was an instruction. I'll try my best, he replied, his voice even. And please, she added, turning to face him, her expression serious, don't get all sensitive if the boys tease you a little. It's just how they are. They're excited about the Apex deal, and they get a little boisterous. It's not personal. It's not personal. The lie was so audacious, so breathtaking, that he almost laughed. He had read the script. He knew the blocking and the dialogue. It was entirely personal. I know, he said, forcing the words out. I get it. They're just joking. Her face relaxed. Good. I'm glad you understand. She patted his knee, a gesture that felt like a dog owner praising a well-behaved pet. Just be cool for me. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Be cool. He would be ice. When they arrived, the party was in full swing. The backyard of her parents' sprawling suburban home was filled with about 30 people. Music was playing, something smooth and jazzy. The air smelled of charcoal and expensive perfume. Marcus and Jamal were holding court by a massive stainless steel grill that probably cost $3,000, flipping burgers and laughing loudly. Terrence got out of the car and took a deep breath. Showtime. He walked with Rochelle into the backyard, a polite smile fixed on his face. He shook hands with her father, a man whose handshake was firm, but whose eyes slid past Terrence's as if looking for someone more important. He hugged her mother, Diana, who squeezed his arm and whispered, "You be good now." A phrase that sounded like a warning. Then came the brothers. Marcus wiped his greasy hand on his apron and clapped Terence on the shoulder, just as Terence had predicted. T-Man, my man. Glad you could make it away from the root. Wouldn't miss it, Terence said smoothly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Jamal sauntered over, a bottle of Corona in his hand. Hey, Terence. Good to see you're taking a day off. The economy might just grind to a halt without you, he said, with a lazy grin. Several cousins standing nearby chuckled. Rochelle laughed along with them. Be nice, you guys, she chided, but her eyes were sparkling with amusement. This was the first lie, the first scene in their play. Terence played his part. He gave a self-deprecating shrug. Someone's got to deliver all the stuff you guys are buying. The line was better than they expected. It was compliant. It affirmed their status as buyers, and his as a server. Marcus roared with laughter. That's the spirit, see? He gets it. For the next hour, Terence was a ghost. He got a plate of food, a burger, some of his mother-in-law's famous mac and cheese, and found a quiet corner to eat it. He listened to the conversations around him, the talk of stock portfolios, of vacation homes, of their children's private school tuition, which ran $25,000 a year. He was invisible, a piece of furniture. People's eyes glazed over when they looked at him. He was Rochelle's husband, the delivery driver. That was the beginning and the end of his story in their eyes. He feigned interest while Jamal went on and on about the specifics of their Apex Connect application. It's a game changer, T, Jamal said, leaning in conspiratorially, as if letting Terence in on a huge secret. We're talking about a fleet of 50 trucks in 5 years. We're going to be bigger than anyone in the family could have ever dreamed. That sounds amazing, man, Terence said, nodding slowly. I'm really happy for you. I hope you get it. He made sure his voice was full of sincere, simple-minded hope. He was the loyal, supportive, but ultimately clueless brother-in-law. The role fit him like a glove. They had tailored themselves. He saw Rochelle watching him from across the lawn, a small, satisfied smile on her face. He was behaving. He was being cool. He was swallowing the insults and playing the part of the good-natured loser. She was proud of her training. He checked the time on his $89 Timex, 5:15 p.m. The main event was coming soon. He felt a strange sense of calm descend over him. The anger was still there, but it was now a solid core of purpose deep inside him. He was no longer a victim in their drama. He was the director, and they just didn't know it yet. He was letting them set the stage, arrange the lighting, and rehearse their lines. He was giving them all the rope they could ever want. The final act was about to begin, and he was the only one who knew the ending. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The jazz music had been replaced by classic R&B, and the mood was mellow, lubricated by expensive wine and craft beer. It was 5:28 p.m. Terence stood near the edge of the patio, holding a cup of water, watching. Rochelle was laughing with a group of her cousins, her head thrown back, the picture of carefree happiness. Her brothers, Marcus and Jamal, were standing near the center of the yard, looking smug and triumphant. The moment was ripe. As if on cue, Jamal clinked a fork against his beer bottle, the sound cutting through the music and chatter. Can I get everybody's attention for a minute? A little quiet, please. The crowd gradually silenced. People turned toward him, expectant smiles on their faces. Rochelle caught Terence's eye and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent command. Get ready. Jamal raised his bottle. I just want to say thank you all for coming. It's beautiful to have the family together like this. And as most of you know, Marcus and I are on the verge of something really big. Something that's going to change this family's future. He paused for dramatic effect. We're building an empire, brick by brick. There was a smattering of applause and whoops. We're taking risks, Jamal continued, his voice swelling with self-importance. We're putting ourselves out there, chasing the big score, because that's what leaders do. That's how you build generational wealth. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then, as rehearsed, they landed on Terrence. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. But an empire isn't just about the leaders, he said, his voice dripping with mock solemnity. It's also about the hard-working men and women who do the day-to-day grind. The people who make the whole thing run. Terrence felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to him. The heat of their collective gaze was intense, a physical force. He could feel their pity, their amusement. He stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "And so," Jamal declared, raising his bottle higher, "I want to propose a toast to my brother-in-law, Terrence." The silence was absolute. "For showing us that it's also important to have guys who can deliver the things that people like us build." "To the delivery guys, we couldn't do it without you." A few people clapped uncertainly. Others snickered. Marcus was beaming, slapping his brother on the back. Rochelle was looking at Terrence, her face a mask of false sympathy, waiting for his reaction, waiting for the flicker of hurt, the flash of anger. The punchline had landed. The humiliation was complete. Terrence did not give her the satisfaction. He simply raised his cup of water an inch, a gesture of acknowledgement, and took a small sip. He held Jamal's gaze, his face a perfect blank. And then a new sound intruded. It was a low, powerful rumble from the street out front, the sound of large, high-performance engines. It grew louder, closer. Heads began to turn. The sound was too deep, too menacing for a typical suburban street. It was the sound of money and power. Suddenly, 3 immaculate, gleaming black Lincoln Navigators, each one a $95,000 statement of corporate authority, pulled up in a neat, coordinated line in front of the house. They took up the entire curb. The engines cut off, plunging the street into an even more profound silence. The party chatter died completely. Everyone was staring, confused. The doors of the SUVs opened in near unison. 3 men emerged from the lead vehicle, and 2 from each of the others. They were not dressed for a cookout. They wore exquisitely tailored dark suits, crisp white shirts, and shoes that shone even in the fading light. These were Tom Ford and Armani suits, $6,000 garments that made the brothers' trendy blazers look like they came from a discount store. The man in the lead, Elias Vance, was tall and commanding, his deep brown skin luminous in the sunset. He surveyed the stunned crowd in the backyard with cool, impassive eyes. He started walking, not toward the front door, but straight across the lawn, his expensive leather shoes leaving imprints in the soft grass. The other men, clearly his subordinates, fell into formation behind him. They moved with a purpose that was both unnerving and utterly captivating. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They ignored Marcus and Jamal, who stood frozen by the grill, their mouths slightly agape. They walked past Rochelle's parents. They walked right past Rochelle, whose smug smile had been replaced by a mask of utter confusion. Elias stopped directly in front of Terrence. The other 6 men fanned out behind him, creating an imposing wall of dark suits. The backyard had become a boardroom. "Terrence," Elias said, his voice calm and clear, ringing through the silent yard. He extended a hand. "Sorry to interrupt your weekend." Terrence shook his hand, a firm, familiar grip. "Elias." "Richard," he said, nodding to the man beside Elias, a pale, nervous-looking executive who was sweating slightly in his suit. "I wasn't expecting you all to come in person." Elias's eyes glinted. "Some things require a personal touch." He gestured to the nervous man. "You know Richard Cole, our regional VP of operations for the Southeast. Richard stepped forward, clutching a leather-bound portfolio that probably cost $500. He looked at Terrence with a level of deference that bordered on fear. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice shaky. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion. But as you know, we're finalizing the Q3 carrier contracts, and there was one pending application I felt required your direct, final sign-off before we proceeded." The entire yard was frozen. "Mr. Henderson? Sir? Final sign-off?" The words didn't compute. Jamal was staring, his beer bottle held limply at his side. Marcus looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Rochelle's face had gone from confused to chalk white. She was looking back and forth between Terrence, the man she thought she knew, and these titans of industry who were addressing him with such profound respect. Terrence looked at Richard, his expression unchanged. "And which application would that be, Richard?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of command. Richard fumbled with his portfolio, his hands trembling. He opened it to a marked page. "It's a new local vendor, sir. A company called Bold Move Logistics." The name dropped into the silence like a bomb. Jamal made a small, choking sound. Marcus took an involuntary step forward. Rochelle's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning, catastrophic horror. All eyes were on Terrence, the delivery driver, the man who needed to be reminded of his place. He held the power of a $2.5 million contract in the palm of his hand, and everyone in the yard knew it. He let the moment hang in the air, a perfect, agonizing tableau of reversed fortunes. He looked from the terrified face of the vice president to the stunned, disbelieving faces of his wife's brothers. Finally, his eyes settled on Rochelle. He saw the frantic calculation in her eyes, the desperate attempt to rearrange her entire understanding of the man she had married and systematically belittled. He turned back to Richard. His voice was soft, but every single person heard the two devastating words that followed. Contract denied. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a swift and silent collapse. The two words spoken by Terrence on that perfectly manicured lawn set off a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of the arrogance and cruelty of Rochelle and her brothers. Their downfall was not a matter of revenge. It was a simple, brutal accounting of their own actions. The first consequence was immediate and absolute. Richard Cole, the regional VP, snapped his $500 leather portfolio shut with a click that echoed in the dead silence. "Understood, Mr. Henderson," he said, relief washing over his face. He clearly had his own reservations about the application and was glad to have them validated from on high. To Marcus and Jamal, he didn't even give a parting glance. As far as Apex Connect was concerned, Bold Move Logistics had just ceased to exist. The projected $2.5 million annual contract, the foundation of their entire business plan, evaporated into the humid Georgia air. The second consequence followed within 48 hours. The $150,000 loan Marcus and Jamal had secured for their two Freightliner trucks was collateralized against their future earnings, specifically the promise of the Apex contract. The loan officer at the regional bank had been skeptical, but had been swayed by their bravado and the sheer size of the potential client. On Monday morning, after Richard Cole's office formally notified them that their application was rejected, the bank's risk department was automatically alerted. By Tuesday at 10 a.m., the bank called in the loan. They had 90 days to repay the full $150,000 plus interest, an impossible sum. When they couldn't, the bank repossessed the two trucks they were so proud of, the ones with the flashy $6,000 vinyl wraps. The empire was reduced to a pile of debt and two guys with no trucks and no prospects. The third consequence was for Rochelle. Her position at the downtown PR firm had always been a source of pride for her, a symbol of her superiority. What Terrence knew, and she did not, was that her firm had recently won a lucrative $500,000 a year retainer to handle regional marketing for Apex Connect. On Wednesday, Elias Vance made a quiet call to the CEO of the PR firm. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply stated the facts. The wife of a key stakeholder in his company had been involved in a scheme with family members who had fraudulently misrepresented their position to try and secure a contract. It was a massive conflict of interest and a potential embarrassment to Apex. He didn't need to ask for her termination. The PR firm, terrified of losing the massive Apex account, did the math. Rochelle, with her $85,000 salary, was a liability they couldn't afford. She was called into her boss's office on Thursday afternoon and fired, told her position was being eliminated due to restructuring. She walked out of the gleaming office tower carrying her belongings in a cardboard box, just another casualty of her own choices. The fourth consequence was the social and familial implosion. The story of the Cookout, the black SUVs, and Terrence's quiet, devastating display of power spread through their family and social circle like wildfire. But the narrative was not what Rochelle and her brothers might have hoped. They weren't seen as victims. They were seen as fools. They had spent years looking down on Terrence, only to discover he was the one holding all the cards. Auntie Carol, upon hearing the story from a cousin, called Terrence. "I always knew there was more to you than met the eye, baby," she said, her voice filled with warmth and pride. "Some people are so busy looking at the price tag they don't see the value." The family, which had once orbited around the loud ambitions of the brothers, now saw them for what they were: arrogant, entitled men who had tried to punch up and had been knocked out cold. They became a cautionary tale, whispered at other family gatherings. The final and most personal consequence was the end of the marriage. The night of the Cookout, Terrence had packed a bag and gone to stay in a corporate apartment Elias kept for visiting executives, a sleek, minimalist space in a Buckhead glass tower with a view of the city lights. Rochelle had bombarded his phone with a series of frantic, escalating messages. 7:15 p.m. Terrence, what the hell was that? Who were those men? You need to call me now. 8:30 p.m. My brothers are freaking out. You can't just do that. You have to fix this. It was a joke. It was just a stupid joke. 10 p.m. Okay, I get it. You're mad. But a silent partner in Apex? For how long? Why wouldn't you tell me? We're married. 11:45 p.m. This is my family's future you just destroyed over a stupid toast. I can't believe how selfish you are. 2 a.m. Please, baby, come home. We can talk about this. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I love you. He read the messages, each one a station of her emotional cross. Confusion, anger, justification, blame, and finally, a desperate, hollow plea. He felt nothing. The love he'd once had for her had been burned away, leaving behind only the cold ash of betrayal. The next morning, he hired the best divorce attorney in Atlanta, a woman who billed at $1,200 an hour. When Rochelle was served with the papers, she learned the final, crushing truth. The pre-incorporation agreement Terrence had signed with Elias 15 years ago predated their marriage by a decade. His 8% stake in Apex Connect, now valued at over $14 million, was his sole and separate property. She was entitled to none of it. Her attempts to claim half of their shared life were met with a simple accounting of her own financial behavior: the secret $5,000 loan to her brothers from their joint account, the exorbitant spending on her credit cards. She would walk away with half the value of their used Honda and the furniture in the apartment. She had gambled on her brother's imaginary empire and lost her share of a real one. 1 year later, the Atlanta skyline looked different to Terrence. He wasn't looking at it from the cracked windshield of a delivery van, but through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his own office, on the 45th floor of the Apex Connect Tower in Buckhead. The rain was streaking down the glass, a soft, cleansing sound. Below, the city lights blurred into a glittering tapestry. The rain no longer meant a miserable, soaking delivery. It was just weather, something to be watched from a place of warmth and security. He hadn't taken the executive role Elias had always offered. Instead, he had created his own. He was the head of the new fleet expansion and driver relations division. He hadn't given up the road entirely. He had traded his old van for a brand new, top-of-the-line Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, a $70,000 vehicle he'd paid for in cash. He still went out on routes once a week, not because he had to, but because he needed to. He needed to feel the weight of a box, the rhythm of the road, to stay connected to the men and women who were the true engine of the company. His hands, though now softer, still had their calluses. They were a reminder of where he came from, a source of pride, not shame. His division was thriving. He had used his authority and his capital to launch a new program, the Driver-to-Owner Pathway. It provided financing and mentorship for experienced Apex drivers who wanted to start their own small delivery businesses, to own their own trucks, to build their own futures. He was using his success not to build a personal empire, but to cultivate a garden of opportunity for others. His first investment was a $50,000 grant to Auntie Carol's church, which had finally bought the adjacent building and was building the youth center. He had named it the Henderson Center for Community Growth. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Elias. "Dinner at 8? My treat. We're celebrating the Q4 numbers. Your division is up 30%? Terrence smiled. "On my way," he typed back. He stood up and put on his jacket. It wasn't the $950 Hugo Boss suit. He rarely wore that. It was a simple, well-made blazer that cost $400, comfortable and unpretentious. As he was about to leave, his eyes fell on a framed drawing on his desk. It wasn't a child's drawing. There was no child. It was a simple pencil sketch he had commissioned from a local artist. It depicted a pair of hands, strong and calloused, carefully holding a small cardboard box. Underneath, a simple plaque read, "The value is in the delivery." He had seen Rochelle one last time 6 months ago. He'd been at a Starbucks on Lexington when she walked in. She looked diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by something generic and off the rack. Her luminous confidence had been extinguished. Leaving behind a brittle and exhausted anger, she saw him and approached his table, and, "I hope you're happy," she had said, her voice thin and reedy. Terrence looked at her, and for the first time felt a pang of something that wasn't anger, but a distant, detached pity. "I am, Rochelle," he said, and the honesty of it surprised even him. "I'm at peace." "You destroyed my family?" she accused. "No," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You made choices. Your brothers made choices. I just stopped agreeing to pay the price for them." He stood up, leaving his half-finished coffee on the table. "I wish you well, Rochelle. I truly do." He walked away, leaving her standing there, a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to him. Forgiving her wasn't for her benefit, it was for his. It was the final box he had to deliver, the one that contained his own freedom. Now, standing in his office, the city glowing below him, he understood the real moral of his story. True wealth isn't about stock options, or glass towers, or the number on your paycheck. It's not about what you acquire, but what you build. It's not about the price tag of your clothes, but the character of the person wearing them His wife's family had been so obsessed with the appearance of success that they had failed to recognize the real thing when it was sitting at their own dinner table, quietly eating a plate of grits. They saw a delivery driver. They failed to see the man who delivered. They had mocked his job, but his job had taught him everything he needed to know: patience, strategy, and the simple, profound truth that what matters most is getting the package where it needs to go, intact and on time. He had finally delivered a package to himself, a new life built on respect, purpose, and the quiet dignity of a job well done. We all face moments where we are underestimated. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it? Share your story in the comments below. We believe that everyone has a story of quiet strength waiting to be told. And if you're inspired by Terrence's journey, be sure to like and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding justice and building a life of true value.